I wanted to just take you through many years of work, not all of the work, just clips, some examples of what I've been doing over the last 25 years and give you some context to who I am, what I make, show you an overview and then ask some questions at the end. So that's how this evening will run. It's always nice to begin with sexy photos. And this is me aged 11. It's a little bit bleached out. I don't know what's happened in the transformation from projector to screen. I actually have slightly darker skin in the picture, but still lots of freckles there. And I'm not going to take you through everything I did in the beginning. But I think, you know, to give a context is always quite important. Somebody just appears to have some idea of where they've come from. So at the age of 11, I had a music teacher at school who played us this piece of music. Some of you are familiar with this piece. And it's extraordinary. You're 11 years old, you're in your piano music lesson at school, and the teacher explains and plays a recording, or even makes a performance, I don't remember, of the piece, which is essentially 4 minutes 33 of silence. I was thrilled and confused. I went home and we had a piano very much like this, an upright piano. And I took the front of it off, put a tape recorder inside and just hammered away on the piano. Not with any notion of, wow, I'm an artist, I'm a musician, simply because we had this device. We had this very sophisticated, futuristic looking tape recorder. And my brother and I would record everything. And by that I mean everything, in the sense that recently I digitized all my old cassettes. I'm a very great archivist, so I've still got all those tapes from age 11. And there are recordings of my brother and I watching television. And we used to just record television and us just sitting in the living room. We used to record our dinners. Simply because you could press record. And at those times, nobody could take photos. They were too expensive to take photos. Cassettes were really cheap. You'd buy them from Woolworths or somewhere for 30 pence. And they became memories. You know, it's incredible how these tapes, I've still got them, so having listened to them last year, it's remarkable to go through them and to be taken back to those rooms. There's points where my mother will come in and I will have an argument about biscuits, which won't be resolved tonight, clearly, because there's biscuits here and we'll all be arguing over the biscuits later. But it's funny to think, you know, when you're so young, you have no real picture of what you want to do when you're older, you know, but these machines enabled something to happen for me. I had an English teacher. I'm not going to go through every piece of technology I ever had, don't worry, it could be a long evening. It's tempting for another event. My English teacher gave me this tape recorder when I was about 14 or 15. And suddenly the world changed for me. This recorder, which was great, could record one thing. Then you press pause and you record something else afterwards. If you rewind the tape and press record, you record over everything that's been. So it's a very linear way of working with sound and memory. This machine was amazing because you could put something on the tape and then you could add something on top of it, then add something else. Except the problem with the one he gave me, perhaps the reason he got rid of it, was that it never stayed in time, in a sense. So if I recorded myself going like this, and then thought, I'm going to overdub something and go, it would never be in the same, it would always be out of the time signature. So I suddenly gave up on the idea of keeping things in time, very young, you know. I thought, let's try and experiment. And I played all these games by, you can set things called tape loops up with it. So I used to set a huge tape loop up where you take a piece of the tape, you wrap it around a milk bottle around the room. And I used to put a microphone out of my bedroom window, hit record, and just the sound of the street would come into my room. So somebody would walk past and you'd hear, and that would go on the tape, and it would take about a minute, and it would come round and make a repeat, and then somebody would drive past. So this thing would build up for hours. I was a tragically lonely teenage boy stuck in his bedroom with technology. Nothing has changed today. I bought a smaller recorder, which meant I could travel with it, I could go to school, I could record my school friends, I could do all kinds of things. And I discovered technology. This was life-changing, bought in Selfridge's department store in London, an Atari computer. I had no interest and still have no interest in computer games, but this suddenly meant I could make music and store it and build layers of sound up and really start manipulating it. And this, in fact, is the last piece of technology I'm showing you. This is my first proper grown-up Macintosh computer, and why this is interesting is this is a VHS recorder. So I could record sound, but I could also make videos, and you could put films in there and cut them up and loop them and do all kinds of strange things. So suddenly this rather bizarre looking device opened up a whole new world of visuals and sound. Over the years, what happened, I began putting records out, making concerts, all kinds of things, making installations in places. Things not to do, we can talk about it later. To use 10,000 latex balloons in an installation, don't do it. You can make a note of that. In Newcastle, in Sunderland, I made this installation, a permanent piece in a hospital which is for rehabilitation of people with spinal injuries and neck injuries and all kinds of things. So it's a space with an ambient lighting system that adjusts and a sound system to enhance healing in a way. So I did this, some years ago. All kinds of strange things, even a musical for children. And after I've shown you my work, you'll suddenly think, he was obviously the ideal man to write a musical. He'd be the first person I'd call. So I want to take you through in a bit more detail in projects here. And I know I'm going quite fast, I get excited. But I'm just trying to give you an overview of the different things that feed into how I become the funny fellow I am. So back in 2002, I was working in Rome, and I was delighted to be invited by the British School, who each year would have an artist invited, and you would make a work. And essentially it was visual artists, it was sculptors, it was painters. And I was the first person there that worked with sound. And the way these things go is always interesting. You make a recreational visit, a recce. And this happens so often with work. If you're working on commissions, you visit a place, you spend X amount of hours or days in this place, and then at the end you sit with the curator and the team around a table and have nice cakes, hopefully, and they say, so what are your ideas? As if in this moment everything has come together. I had no ideas whatsoever. It doesn't always happen like that. So I just bluffed something probably. But I came home and I saw this film by Michelangelo Antonioni, who happened to just be turning 90 years old at the time. And I saw this film, L'Eclisse. Have you seen this film, The Eclipse? It's like all of Antonioni's films. It's very slow. It's very demanding of the spectator. And it's often about kind of broken relationships. Wow, you say, I must go and get one of his films out now and have a look at it. What a salesman I am. But what was remarkable was the film was made 40 years before the time I was in Rome. So suddenly I'm seeing Rome in a very different way. There was no traffic. It was a very different scene. The people were all wearing suits. Visually, it was a very different city. So what I did was something really simple. I took the film, and at the end of the film, as you haven't seen the film, I'm going to tell you what happens at the end of the film. A man and a woman meet, and they agree to meet in this particular place, and the camera waits for them, but they never appear. So over 52 different images, the camera just goes boom, boom, trying to find them in the street, at a bus stop, outside a building, and they never arrive. So you have this 2 minutes at the end of the film. What I did was slow that down so it takes 40 minutes. So what you're seeing now is an excerpt from it. So this is 2 minutes of film slowed down, so it takes around 40 minutes to play. And all the sound you hear is the sound from the film, all kind of compacted. So piano themes, voices, footsteps, bicycle wheels, taxis, into this very deliberately slow motion film.
Però conosco qualcuno che possa sostituirmi. Penso io se vuoi. D'altra parte, non è il caso di continuare. Oppure se c'è qualcosa da imparare.
È questo che volevi dirmi?
Io vado.
Aspetta.
Ma cosa devo aspettare?
Aspetta un momento.
Senti, qui abbiamo dato di dirci c'è qualcosa. Perché adesso me lo vuoi tirare fuori?
No. Tu certe cose non le resisti. Non sei cattiva.
Solo che non è con te.
Può darsi vittoria, ma non importa. Sì, forse se sentiamo un'ultima cosa. Non mi ami più, non posso sposarmi.
So it was presented as both an installation in a gallery, it was shown in cinemas, and also as a live performance, so I would perform the soundtrack live. It was a deliberate response at the time to so much fast-moving digital media and the kind of rapidity of technology that we experience. So it was something just to make you step back and just kind of dream with it, in a sense. Of course, it was very testing for people. Many people said they really enjoyed it, but they never watched the film. They just lay there with their eyes closed because they enjoyed the soundtrack. But it was a very conscious attempt to make something to slow people down for a moment. On to something completely different, and what I'm trying to do here is just show you a real variety of projects. Out of all the things I've done, and I've done some very strange projects, to be honest, this is probably one of the most unusual. This was something that emerged from an email. I received an invitation to visit this hospital in Garches, just on the outskirts of Paris, a hospital that specialises in road accident victims, people who have no long-term expectation of passing away, but suddenly you're in a car and you have an accident and, unfortunately, one of your family is dead, your neighbour, whoever it may be. It's an awful place. So when I received an email that said, would you consider working with us on a project designing sound for a morgue? And my first response was, yes, this sounds perfect. You know, I like a challenge. The space was designed by Ettore Spalletti, an Italian artist and architect who I'd happened to bump into sometime before when I was working in Italy, and he'd kept our meeting in mind. So when he designed the space, he said it's not finished until there's sound. So what I'm showing you here is a real morgue in a hospital. This is where the bodies are laid out, and it's where you spend the last 20 minutes with a loved one. In French, the name of this space, Le Salle Départ, translates as the departure lounge. It's a little bit like an airport. It's like the last room you're in before you bid farewell. And in fact, bidding farewell to someone is one of the most important things one can do in that sense of closure, both for you and that entire situation. So it was a very difficult project to work on, extremely difficult. In the end, I spent probably close to a year going nowhere with it, to the point I thought, no one wants to be in a morgue. Nobody wants to visit a morgue. Why would you have sound? Why would you write music? And I was working at home, and suddenly it started to pour with rain outside, and I thought, wow, this is a great feeling when there's terrible weather outside and you're indoors. There's a real sense of protection, you know, a real sense that you're safe whilst everything else is horrendous outside. And I started thinking, if I was to use all the recordings I have that have personal meaning to me, for example, a recording I'd made on a boat in Denmark on a lake, myself reciting prayers in all kinds of different languages and whispering them, to offer a human presence. And I'm going to play you some of the sound here, although this obviously isn't the right context to play it in. Again, there was space for 3 bodies to be laid out, and this is where you have, you know, these last 20 minutes. So let me play you something. I played at an artificial volume, which it wouldn't get played at. And the sound is at a volume rather like something like the projector. If I was to switch this projector off now, you would suddenly think, oh, what's that sound? Hello? You would suddenly think, oh, it stopped. But it's not until I point out a sound like the projector that you start to hear it. So the sound on this is almost invisible. The idea is it's a bit like a colour or a paint on the wall. And it's operated there since it was installed, and it's strange because when one makes work, you often consider an audience. I'm here. If I make a great joke, you laugh. I'm trying. But if you go to a concert, people clap. There's always a kind of response. If you make a recording, you hope that someone may review it or respond to it. You write a book, you hope for it to be reviewed. A project like this, there is no feedback loop. You throw this out there, and I realize I've done a number of projects where I have no idea what people actually feel about it. The first time I made work that was outside of me, in the sense I wasn't performing it, is the most out-of-body experience you can have, because you just leave this thing and you walk away. It's like having a child and you leave it there and hope that in 3 months' time when you return, it's still there. What I did with this piece, I recorded the piano and I processed it inside the computer. So it sounds a little bit like someone's practicing the piano far away, 1 or 2 kilometers, and you just hear it appear through the window. As I say, it's kind of an impossible thing to play to you because it's completely the wrong context. Ironically, after the piece went out, it was quite successful, and I had 2 invitations from 2 other hospitals asking me to make pieces for their morgues. And I thought, I'm not sure I really want to be recognised as the fellow that makes soundtracks for morgues, to have that as my lasting reputation. But I've had feedback from people who've used it, and it's been very moving. And if you've lost anyone or had to be in this situation in a hospital to bid farewell to someone, it's extremely difficult. And sound is really, really important. So if anything, if this helps people in any small way, then I really feel like I've kind of offered something. And really, I'm going really from one ridiculous thing to another in a sense. I do a number of commercial projects, and I thought it's worth sharing them with you because it's quite amusing to realize how one can be responsible for making sound in the world around you. I designed car horns in America for a car manufacturer who wrote to me and said, we need a car horn that says, I'm pregnant, get me to hospital. I need a car horn that says, get out of my way. It's just ridiculous kind of lists of requests, and I made the car horns. I was contacted by Philips over in the Netherlands to work on this thing called the wake-up light. If you're familiar with this kind of concept, they developed an LED that duplicates natural daylight. So instead of you being rudely awoken at 7 AM by this, the light comes in about 20 minutes before you're due to wake. And then the sound starts to ramp up very gently. So by the time the alarm actually rings, you're almost awake anyway. So it's quite a beautiful way for it to operate. Let me play it to you. This is one of the ringtones. And a very difficult project to make. It's always interesting to show these things and think, looks so simple. It took so long because you have to basically work out what sound would you like to wake up to. If I was to ask any of you, as I did at the time, ask my friends, they'd say, I love to wake up to the sound of the water rushing in from the sea. Another friend will say, if I hear the sound of the sea, it makes me want to pee. It's so stressful. What a way to wake up. Somebody else will say, I love the sound of the rain striking against the window. It's such a, great sound. Another friend will say, I don't want to get out of bed if I hear it raining. So you can't win. So I had to conjure up a series of different possibilities, and it was so complicated to develop this on so many creative levels, but also technically to get the sound inside here for it actually to work was impossibly complex. So I sat in a room with the director of design at Philips at one side of the table, a technician here and me, and I worked in real time whilst they were analysing all the frequency waves to see if it would actually function inside. It was the most absurdly technical, demanding thing, but they sold 250,000 of these. So the idea of 250,000 people waking up with you every day, it's a nice thought. Pervert. So I worked with Jasper Morrison, a London-based designer, on a telephone, a kind of very retro-looking telephone. Shall we hear it? The amusing thing about this was it took so many iterations to get a ringtone, or not a series of ringtones that might appeal. And of course, the first feedback response, once the phone went on sale, was many of our customers can't actually hear the ringtones because the frequency was too high. And as you get older, you lose certain frequencies. And so a number of the people that bought the telephone actually had lost their hearing to a certain degree, so actually could never hear the telephone. So I had to remake lots of the ringtones so it would appeal to the audience. Now onto something very ambitious. Over in, actually this travelled quite a bit, but I've got footage from San Francisco. UVA, if you're not familiar with them, United Visual Artists, are visual artists based in London who, over the years, have visualised stage settings for many famous musicians. They are responsible for bands like Massive Attack, Radiohead, people like Beyonce, all these people in the pop world, George Michael, for designing these extraordinary visual sensations. So when you see the band and they have these incredible projections. U2 was the band they toured when they in fact just finished doing the latest U2 setup. And they do these incredibly ambitious works, ridiculous scale. So every now and then they like to just come back and think, let's try and do something a bit more arty, a bit more playful. We had a conversation and we said, you know, what is this about sound and visual? So they decided what was interesting was, let's make a piece you can worship. Let's make an object with technology that's a bit like being in a chapel. So let's see where we go with it. So this was installed over a period of weeks in each location. What was interesting about this was the sound and the shape of the light would never repeat. There was an algorithm, particularly with the sound, that meant I made sound and it cut it up into kind of splinters of sound, which were then shot around the speaker system, so it would never ever repeat. It was like this incredible kind of granular synthesis model that just kept re-changing and reshaping itself. Curious that when it showed in San Francisco, as you see here, people just lay on the ground and they were really chilled. When they showed it in New York, people were really edgy and all kind of running around. And it was very amusing when we made the work. I was there for about a week helping with the installation. It's a ridiculously simple but complicated installation. Every time I went out to get a sandwich or to go to the loo, I'd come back and they'd say, "Did you just know David Byrne of the Talking Heads was just here, came to see the piece?" I'm like, I just missed him. And I'd go away again and they'd say, "Oh, do you know that Robert De Niro and whoever just happened to pop in to have..." And just, it was this list, it wasn't even a joke. Every time I went away, there seemed to be another celebrity because I wanted to have a sandwich. So it's a lesson to be learned there. If anything tonight, you remember these lessons. So live transmission was another, I use the word again, ambitious project. Working with Heritage Orchestra, a UK-based orchestra who worked with a lot of pop artists. And we had an invitation to rework the music of the band Joy Division, who many of you are probably familiar with, this kind of seminal 80s band from Manchester. And, or Salford even. Salford? No? Sorry? Macclesfield, there we go. So, that's good. So, that was just a test, quite clearly. And what was interesting was they asked me to work on it, and I thought, well, I've grown up with all the songs, but what I don't want to do is just do cover versions of the songs. Let's do them from memory. So what I did, I rewrote the pieces from the way I remembered them, which sounds slightly absurd, which meant we then worked with an orchestrator who orchestrated the pieces, and then we performed them with a 35-piece orchestra and singers and a live rock band. It was ridiculous. I mean, the scale of it was utterly ridiculous. It was a very risky thing to do, because the thing I did not want to do was to do cover versions. You think with an orchestra you're just going to do these kind of jaunty covers of Love Will Tear Us Apart or whatever it may be. And what we did actually was just kind of recontextualize them in a very beautiful way. And to be truthful, even though I was part of it, it was a very successful project. It offered an intimacy and a real meaning. In fact, we worked, people like Peter Saville, the designer, was given his blessing to it. We worked with members of New Order who were really very complimentary and helped us. I got access to the original tapes of the band, so I had the original vocal. It's absolutely ridiculous. I paid something like £65, and I got all the original vocals of Ian Curtis for the songs. They went to the studio and you think, is it really that easy to get these kind of seminal recordings? So I had the recordings, which then I would kind of play with inside the pieces. So I got a small clip, which isn't the best clip. Lots of people videoed it, so you can see it online because there's no official recording of it. We made a tour, we played about 15 shows. And risky as it was, it proved to be a great success. Audiences were very well-intentioned and very behind it. So I'll play you a small excerpt here, which is probably the most straight piece of the actual event. No, that's people we paid afterwards to say good things about it, so I don't want to show that, it's just embarrassing. But if you want to, have a look online. There's some great bootleg videos that people made, which are much more interesting than the one clip I have. There was the hope to do it again, but it was just so expensive, unfortunately. There's things you learn when you work with an orchestra and you work with the visuals. It cost about £18,000 a night to put on the show. So then you have to work out, you have to sell 2,000 tickets to pay for that, so you can only play in certain venues, and the logistics. We made this one UK tour, it sold out, but then it's very tricky to kind of repeat that and try and break even. So unfortunately it never happened again, so a kind of a moment in time. It's a way I make a living. If people are always curious, like, what do you do actually to make a living? Well, I do lots of different things, but contemporary dance is a way that remains a kind of steady income for me. In fact, last year I scored 10 pieces for contemporary dance, an orchestral piece in London for Romba, a piece over in France, and so on. And this is a piece with Dutch National Ballet, a group or a company I worked with a number of times, and we'll be working with them again next year on a new production. Now, most of you are familiar with The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, Narnia. We got permission only for 1 year because they're very strict about the licensing for this estate. So we made a version of Narnia with the Young Company in combination with a hip-hop group called Ish. The most fantastic moment when you have people who are dancing on point with the most incredible movement and poise, mixed with people who just have the most absurd movement, the kind of street dancers. And they kind of try to outdo each other. You'll see in the little clip I have here how ridiculous it was. A lot of those moves were stolen from me, if you can tell, but it was a great production because it's a very young audience. I mean, lots and lots of children came along. There's nothing more exciting than sitting there and seeing kids standing up in their seats cheering and loving every moment. There was a great throwaway moment in the piece. What were those creatures called? Beavers. They had beavers, and it's the most throwaway moment in the entire dance piece, and everybody raved about the dancing beavers and the reggae music. It was the most embarrassing moment in a sense. It was so cheesy, but everybody loved it. It was this really warm, organic feeling. I think what I like about working with dance is that people don't come for the music. They come for other things, the dance mostly. And what I really enjoy is you can get away with quite a lot. And by that I mean you can kind of pull people into this other world of sound through the movement on the stage. And so they'd never come to a concert of this music, but suddenly there you are in a theatre and you're listening to this stuff. And it's quite extraordinary, actually. I mean, the other thing that's always appealing to me is you basically go to the opening, you go to the premiere, and I sit in the audience nervously watching around, like one I went to recently that was in London. There was an elderly couple behind me who opened the programme up and said, "Ah, music by Scanner. At which point I thought, I'm just not going to listen to this. And at the end I get to walk up on stage and take a bow because all my work is done beforehand. So it's quite a nice feeling. But it's a great way for work to travel without you. And I've always enjoyed making work where it goes out and it explores the world without me and I can stay at home quite comfortably. Lazy person. No, not at all. Back with UVA on something. I'm coming close to the end here. We did a thing recently over in Tasmania at this amazing museum in a collaboration with scientists on a project called On the Origins of Art, or the Origin of Art. And it was working with an idea of how could we make everybody a performer in a way, using light and sound. What way could your body become the performer? So we developed this space. Now, these are videos I just took off Instagram, so apologies for the quality. But they give you an idea. I have two different ones. One is much more amusing than the other one, but you can work out which one perhaps. So this is the first one. And so your body is reflected in the light movement, and the sound is, it's not going to come across in the video, entirely from the floor to the ceiling. The sound is changing, dependent upon your movement. So you could also throw the sound around. You could literally do this and pick a sound and just move it around you so it's completely 360. So it was a very beautiful piece. It was quite simple with a whole number of sensors. There were about 4 on kind of different levels all the way around. You could actually get down to recognizing fingers. So the sensor would actually recognize if you did this. You could change the sound by clenching your fist and kind of grab it and move it. So it was an experiment to see what happened, but obviously guys like this like to balance on one leg and spin around and really enjoy themselves. Onto something permanent again, and it's always a pleasure to make work which actually is also permanent. Lots of works exist for a time and disappear, some happen just once. Rijeka Airport over in Croatia, it's a permanent piece based in the departure lounge, ironically. Doesn't connect to the French piece earlier, it's another type of real departure lounge. And it was part of a commission, and a number of artists won commissions to make works in the airport. A challenging work because Rijeka Airport is a curious building which is too complicated to explain while I'm here now. But I made this piece which is called Water Drops. The airport is situated or surrounded by water, and water plays a very key role in the makeup of the area. And so as you go down the staircase into the departure lounge, you hear this soundtrack playing, and it's a very long piece. So the piece itself is several hours long. Most people get to experience it for all of 2 or 3 minutes. That's the way these things go. But it's a kind of generative system. It's working with the Istrian scale, the local musical scale, and the notes are following. It's a very, if you're not familiar with the Istrian scale, it's a very bizarre scale that I can't emulate it here, but it does something like do 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 do, and it always sounds like, huh? I think you hit the wrong note. But you often play in duets with people, so you play with someone, so it's just you and the other person play against one another. And I went to amazing performances, private performances with these elderly gents playing these incredible wind instruments at each other, and there was always what sounds to probably most of our ears like a really bad bum note, but it clearly wasn't it. It was the most extraordinary, very amusing, but you mustn't laugh because it just sounds wrong every time you hear it. It has a kind of Benny Hill element to it. But the piece is there permanently, so if you fly through Rijeka Airport, chances are you'll hear this piece floating away there. Onto something which has just been finished. This is a house in Stoke Newington in London. For around the last 5 years, I've been working with some architects called Chanced Silver, a very dynamic couple who build a whole bunch of kind of very ecologically aware, almost self-generating houses. They're really quite special. And they're really not interested in the idea of making money through selling property. They're much more interested in ideas of how a building may sustain itself through the materials it uses, how it offers something back to an environment. And this house began like this, and it was an old garage. They bought the parking lot, and they started building there. Now the building is based on the music of Eric Satie, the French composer. If you know anything about Eric Satie, he was a very eccentric fellow who made a piece called Vexations, which plays for 18 hours. It's a very repetitive piece of piano music, which I actually am extremely fond of. It's usually played for like an hour by someone, then somebody else takes over, and somebody else takes over, and so on for the duration. He made also a piece of music called furniture music very early on. And what's interesting about furniture music is that when the premiere happened, everybody went quiet because the music began to play. And Satie got really upset and said, no, just keep talking, keep talking. This is meant to be music you ignore. So in many ways, it anticipated lots of music that people like Brian Eno and other composers started to put out in the 70s and 80s. based on ideas of ambient music, this kind of music that's ignorable as it is listenable. But Satie was kind of way ahead. I mean, he was a funny fellow. When he died, they found he had 2 grand pianos in his living room. One was completely filled with letters. He had identical series of velvet or velvet suits made, which just all sat in the room. Very, very unusual character, but an extraordinary composer. So we took the sheet music to Vexations and made a model of what the Vex house would be like, wrapped the music around the building, and where the notes fell, told you where to put the windows. So the windows are in quite odd places. Sometimes they're quite low down, sometimes there's 3 windows in a row, but actually it's the score to Vexations. They commissioned me all that time ago and said, look, we often work with an artist. We've worked with a glass artist, we've worked with a photographer, but we've never worked with sound. It would be great to work with sound on this project. So what they did was just invite me, a whole sense of trust. It's quite amazing, really. And I had no idea what to do, absolutely no idea. So in the end, what I did was took a recording of the making of this building. What you see here is concrete, and it's all been poured. The whole building is made of poured concrete. So this is the sound of it. So there was a sheet, corrugated sheet here, and the concrete would pour down the middle of it. That's the sound of the engine. And I now have 2 permanent pieces that live inside the house. And whoever buys the house then owns a permanent work of art in the house. Just to assure you, you can switch it off. I'm not that cruel. The idea of somebody buying the house and thinking, Jesus, this piece never going to finish, you know? And it doesn't. It's a permanent piece. It's installed on all the levels. There are speakers installed within the walls of the building, so there's no escaping. And here's the first version. Do you recognise how it picks up on the harmonic of the pouring? And on the other floor, so that lives permanently. The idea is that whoever owns the house once a year has to agree to have a public viewing of the house, because they have this architecture day like they have in other countries and other cities, and they have a day when in London they open up many buildings that you couldn't otherwise access. And once a year, whoever owns it has to allow access to the public to come and visit. We did it last year for the open day, and they had about 2,000 people came through at the weekend, which is great to go and see a quite experimental space or building next to some very standard-looking houses in the street. So that's the Vexed house, almost finished here. Show something that just happened this year, which is the way music goes. Christian Dior decided they needed some music for their catwalk for skinny girls to walk up and down the catwalk. to the dreamer is still asleep, which is a Little Moreton Hall. Now, as Hannah suggested in the introduction, it's focused on an idea of sleep. I read a great book by a writer, Sasha, what's her son? Handley, yes, Sasha Handley. And it's like one of the most specialised books you could ever imagine. Someone who wrote an entire book on sleep in Tudor times. I mean, the most exacting subject one could ask for. And I learnt a lot in the book, and there were different things that kind of fascinated me, but there's a lot one can learn about these things. We all probably today recognise sleep deprivation. You know, we can never get enough sleep. We're all so busy these days. I don't know quite what happened, but everyone's busy. If you're familiar with this concept, you want to meet your friends, but they're always busy. Everyone's busy. And so everyone's tired. And what fascinated me was in the Tudor times, everyone was exhausted. Everyone was tired. You'd come and stay here for the night and discover that, in fact, the way of life was that they would have these two sleep patterns. Often they'd go to bed earlier in the evening, get up around midnight and play cards till about 5 a.m. and then have another sleep till midday. Apparently, if you wanted to be intimate with your wife or husband, the time to do it was at midnight because everyone else was kind of busy doing something else, and that was your kind of busy time. Unfortunately, the servants and everyone working there couldn't lead the same kind of pattern, so there was extreme sleep deprivation to the point that a lot of people ended up sleepwalking. There were many tales of such things as of a man being found on the roof, one of the roofs, not at Little Moreton Hall, but locally, just hammering nails in, working on the roof whilst he was fast asleep. A woman who they could put pins in her face and she couldn't feel anything because she had no idea she was awake or asleep. It was a bizarre thing. So it reached the point where people were recommended to sleep standing up. So you can imagine in a house like this, you know, the servants' quarters, they were so exhausted, so stressed out, they'd probably end up just leaning against the wall, sleeping, and then carrying on and on. So they had to work out different methods of being able to sleep. They had day beds set up so you could maybe have a quick nap in the daytime. And they started using herbs from the garden. So they started using all kinds of things to help them, like chamomile and lavender, to help enhance the sleep because the time they had was so limited to actually get their kind of full sleep. So what I was interested in is that moment in between sleeping and waking, which we're probably all familiar with. There's that moment when before an alarm's gone off, or you're on a train and you're traveling, or on a plane and you're asleep, but you're also awake. There's that weird moment where you can almost go into deep sleep for a moment, like for a second, but then you're awake again. And those states are really fascinating. I read an interview with Kate Tempest, the British poet and singer, recently, and she said that much of her first debut album and much of her writing is made whilst in this state of kind of semi-conscious, not quite aware of what you're doing. And it's interesting because I realise I've certainly had moments where I've been able to sort things out when I'm in that sleeping, waking moment. You know, you're trying to work something out. I remember I'd lost a tape in the studio once, and in that little moment there, I was sort of just waking up, I thought, I remembered exactly where it was, and I went to the studio and it had fallen under a cupboard, but my mind, while I was sleeping, had worked out where it was. Sleep deprivation is very dangerous. If you don't sleep enough, you lose the ability to store memories. And it's a really important thing. You know, I'm not sounding like your grandfather here or your dad saying you must sleep, folks, but it's really important. So at this time, people were seriously sleep deprived. So I've made a piece which is situated in the kind of back of the building itself. And what you get when you go out there, this is a card, a postcard, and when you rub anywhere on the card, it releases the smell of lavender. So you can actually have that smell. It's kind of like those scratch and sniff cards if you've been to the cinema that people have, but it's grown more sophisticated, so you can just rub your hand over it and have a smelly hand all day. What a delight. This is where it will be situated. Under here, you can sit on the bench, and there will be speakers around, and the sound will come out here. And I've got a little clip to play you, I think. This is the first time I've played this, so. think that's it. So it's going to run for a duration of months. It's outside, which is really appealing because people are used to always being inside the building and looking through the rooms and admiring. If you know the space, it's an absolutely extraordinary space that's quite, I think bonkers would be the technical term. And I like the idea of pulling people outside the building to spend time in a kind of contemplative space where you can sit and the sound will kind of play around you. So that's The Dreamer is Still Asleep, a tiny excerpt of a much longer piece. So that's the end of my formal presentation. So I'm not sure if that answered everything you need to know about the world around you and all the things I do. Maybe have one or two questions. We have time for a couple of questions if you wish. Otherwise, I ask you questions, and that's when it gets really scary. No. Yes, please.
Are you going to do anything with your childhood sound?
I don't know, actually. You know, there are so many of them, and I don't know who would be interested. It's really curious. I mean, it's funny when you listen to them. I found a tape, my brother's 21st birthday. It says, my brother, my mother, my grandmother, my grandfather, and myself, and everyone is dead apart from me. So it's so weird, you know, it's like all these ghosts. And, you know, you start importing all this stuff and actually realize it has great value to you as memories. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I've kept a diary every day since I was 12 years old. Every single day, I've never missed a day. And I just get into these systems. You know, I haven't got OCD, don't think, but you know, I get into this way of just recording things that have happened. So the tapes, maybe they're only interesting for me. I don't know. You know,
It's still recorded me, like family arguments.
Yeah.
There is a universal factor.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's fascinating because you hear, you know, because what I used to record, why I started recording, I forgot to say really, was because video recorders weren't around. So the only way I could record Spider-Man off television was with the tape recorder. So I'd press play and record, and at the beginning all the credits would come up. So you have me, 11 years old, saying, "Adventures of Spider-Man," and then I read all the credits. That's still on the tape, and then every now and then someone wanders in, and of course the batteries start to die on the tape, so all the speed changes. In fact, last week I found a tape of my brother and his best friend at the time, Gerald, just arguing about music. And I worked it out that I was 9 or 10 when this was happening, because he was about 15, my brother. And they were arguing about music, but it all got all warped. So I managed to kind of just restore the speed. And it was really fantastic to hear this voice of someone who I miss a lot. You know, my brother's no longer around. There's a very special moment. There's that intimacy, you know, and sound particularly can offer that intimacy, I think. You know, for a certain generation, the only photos I have, for example, at home are these very small square photos that we had. There was a particular camera, and if you know this camera, this kind of long plastic camera. We never took photos on birthdays. The only photographs are Christmas, and it's always the cat and the Christmas tree, and me in my pajamas opening a present, and our holidays, which is usually my head chopped off, standing in the water, you know, because my mother wore glasses and she could never frame it. So, you know, so there's not many photos, really. And for me, it's interesting that the sound suddenly brings back so much more. When I used to go on holiday, I used to record the holidays. So when I first went to Berlin, when I first went to Italy, I recorded my entire holiday on cassette. Not the entire holiday, but all my trips. So, you know, on a day trip, on the coach, walking around places. And I imported these, you know, all in the last year. So I've heard lots of them, and it's really fascinating because I can remember those exact moments, those church bells in that square in Rimini, or this walk through Florence, or whatever it may be. And yeah, I'm not sure what to do with them, really. You know, I don't think there's an interest to sell such things, so I just put them up as an archive, you know, Robin's personal selfish archive. I don't know, but it's, you know, today so much life is about sharing, you know, whether we have Instagram, Twitter, all this stuff, Facebook. It's for many generations, it's about sharing constantly. Whereas having grown up, you know, in a different time, none of that was shared. It's all private. None of that was made. The diary has never been for anybody else but me. It's a way of, like, you take a shower once a week, once a day. And no, you take a shower every day, hopefully. But then the diary is a bit like that. It's a kind of cleansing. It's getting this stuff out, and I don't look at it again. It's sort of over. So as for the tapes, I don't know. They've all been digitized. They're sitting on a hard drive. Musically, there's about 600 hours of stuff, and actually some of it's quite good. You know, it's soundtracks I did when I was 15 or 16 to friends' films at school and all kinds of things. But does anybody want to hear that? I don't know. Maybe when I'm long dead, so we'll want to rediscover this archive, and there'll be some absurd box set that will come out with absurd sleeve notes. Yeah, I don't know yet, actually. Obviously, you'll be the first on the list to know. Any other questions there? Yes?
I was just going to, just something you were talking about, lucid dreaming seems to be something that happens in electronic music, because I think Aphex Twin used to talk about it as well. And you were, talking about this idea of sleepwalking and this sort of stuff. So I'm wondering if you do any lucid dreaming while you're...
No, I mean, I'm not somebody... What's interesting for me in terms of this notion of lucid dreaming is, what happens to me is, I've got a new record coming out later this year, and the record is called Fibulae. I was asleep, I woke up and thought Fibulae, so I wrote it down. Fibulae doesn't mean anything. It's a beautiful looking word, I've looked it up. It has no meaning, doesn't connect to anything. And what I've had a tendency to do, certainly sleeping, is make up words quite often. It's quite funny, my brain would just wake up and suddenly go, oh, this is the word, and I write it, and it has no, it's kind of conjoined several languages and several different meanings in this bizarre way. Not musically or creatively, actually, in any way. I'm not a kind of lucid dreaming person, it feels like. I'm somebody, I get up early, and I just work, and then I stop at 6 o'clock, and it's done, and I have a very simple pattern in a way, I just keep on doing it. And sleep, I long for sleep, because I love that moment of disappearing. But I wake up, my body is really annoying. My body is one of those systems that just wakes up early, annoyingly, as my wife will testify. And, I wake up early and I'm kind of tapping because I want things to happen. I'm excited and my adrenaline starts going and everything. But are you nodding to this? Yeah, she's nodding. So I remember once having an operation, and in hospital I was put under, and somebody said to me afterwards, what did you dream about? I remember dreaming I was drumming, and I thought, I bet I was so annoying. Was I really on the operating table going like this? I hope not. That would be really annoying. But the idea of that dream state is really interesting. What happens in that, because sometimes it resolves things. As we all know, dreams can take you to the most absurd places. Certainly when I was younger, I used to write lots of my dreams down. And so many of them were about aliens. I so remember this, always being attacked by aliens. Something happened. Alien dreams have stopped, thankfully. And honestly, Doctor. And no, I can't disappear, and I long for that moment. But, I find that moment of waking up and then time just slipping away really interesting. Like you wake up at 5, and then you close your eyes, and suddenly it's 7. And suddenly what feels like 1 minute has suddenly been 2 hours. And there's this kind of time travel that happens when one sleeps. But sleep deprivation, which I haven't suffered from, is a terrifying thing, and people suffer a lot from it, and it's very, very dangerous mentally. Lots of tests were done last year. There was a girl, actually a number of cases last year. Legally, there were a lot of challenges about people who were sleepwalking and did things. There was a guy in the UK who was caught. I like this story. He was found in the centre of a town somewhere like Newcastle, completely naked. So he got arrested and asked for a selfie with the policeman, but he was fast asleep. But I love the idea, he asked for a selfie completely naked with the policeman. I don't know whether the policeman did it. And they let him off. But there's been cases of people being attacked, like rape and all kinds of hideous things happening. And actually there's this legal precedent. People can't quite work it out because this person was sleepwalking. So they didn't intend to do this. They did it when they were sleepwalking. And I had a partner in the past, and she sleepwalked, and that used to freak me out so much. I've never dealt with anything so scary where someone will get out of bed, they walk over to the computer, they switch it on, they sit there and tap away, and then they close it down, come back and they have no recollection whatsoever of what they did. And she did some very strange things, and I witnessed at first hand how disturbing that notion of sleepwalking can be. I mean, really, really scary. Once she hurt herself, she was a sculptor, went to the studio and she was still asleep, and she crawled across the table where all her sculptures were and cut all her legs open, and all the ceramic and everything on the table was bleeding, had no idea, and just went to bed. It's so scary, that kind of thing. So this idea of making a work, my work is not scary generally anyway, well, it is to some people, the piece at Little Moreton Hall, I want to be about this kind of blurriness. You know, you hear these voices singing, but then they kind of disappear in kind of underneath you and then appear again. It's a bit like sort of going through water, the way you hear when you go through water and you listen and then you put your head under and everything kind of changes and then you come out again and everything's clear again and then you go under. And that's what I'm trying to do with this piece. So you go through these different waves. So it's about 20 minutes long. I have the notion, the idea that most people won't spend 20 minutes there. They'll probably spend 5 or 10 minutes, but it's long enough that you move through these different movements. So that's me trying to explain, bluff my way to an answer.
That's actually, sorry, I think I was just saying it's interesting that you talk about disappearing, and you like that, but you also document lots of things.
Yeah. That's it's a good observation. Yes?
I was going to ask, particularly with the talking about this very specific area of Tudor and sleep patterns, did you come across the idea of sort of communal sleeping as an idea within that? And just as another thing I was going to say, some of my favourite pieces I've actually gone and slept in in the space where the piece is. I remember one of my favourite pieces at Venice Biennale, I had a good 2 hours sort of sleep next to it. Could you do that with the piece? Do you sleep with it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting idea, the way that one sleeps with sound. I mean, there's a number of artists who work with that. I mean, in the last year, Max Richter, if people are familiar with his work, did a piece which is called Sleep, which is the idea that they set up all these beds and it's like a 12-hour performance. There's an Irish group, or lives in Ireland, a guy called Stephen Stapleton has a group with a comical name Nurse with Wound. He does a lot of night performances which are performing music to people while they're sleeping, which is interesting. But communal sleeping was interesting because, as far as I read, it was quite common at the time, actually. A lot of people, because space was very limited, that you often had to share a bed space with a complete stranger. If you were staying over at Little Moreton Hall, you'd have to share the bed with another complete stranger in this way because it was so restricted, the space. So I can't imagine how you would have slept then either. You know, it would have been a very, very awkward and uncomfortable moment for lots of people. But then again, they've been travelling all day in a carriage. They're exhausted. You know, it's a very different way of travelling. We all know how tiring travelling in itself can be. So, you know, the people I think who suffered the most were the people who worked in these buildings, you know, because they were always on call. So the people that wanted to play cards at 5 a.m. still wanted to have their drinks and food. But the people who were there at midday when they woke up still wanted to have all their stuff. So when the team themselves, the staff, were able to actually rest, goodness knows, it was a real challenge, I imagine. Yes?
So you've always embraced technology making your music. What sort of percentage would you say of your music is done on analogue instruments, and what percentage is done on plugins and electronic?
I mean, in the last few years, I've returned for a majority of my recording to analog systems, actually, without becoming a tech boy here and boring other people who may not be interested in the audience. But I come from a background of using real instruments and then discovered technology and the wonders that computers and everything can do. But I realized that so much of my life has been channeled through screens. And I showed a lot of screen work here because it's quite an interesting way, at least, to show the body of work. If you want to hear sound pieces, they're very easy to hear online anywhere, I thought. So I wanted to play lots of videos. And it's a curious one because our lives are mediated through screens, whether it's a telephone, whether it's a laptop, whether it's a television, whether it's the cinema. We take news through that screen. We share communications. We have emails. Our work comes through it. I find it strange when I work on a film soundtrack or a contemporary dance soundtrack, and I sit there with the choreographer, and we have a screen, and we're talking about something that's for our ears, and we both sit there and watch the sounds move across the screen. It's a bizarre scenario. So sometimes I just switch off the screen to stop somebody else watching. So I've returned to lots of like real machines, like synthesizers, old-fashioned ideas of like you move things and things that give you a tactile, physical relationship to it, which I find much more rewarding in a way nowadays, actually, in a way. It depends on what I'm doing. A computer offers so much and so many possibilities, but also I'm a great minimalist and I'm always taking stuff away. So often I use very minimal means, hopefully, to get reasonable maximum effect. I don't mean by volume, but I mean by just thinking through what works and what doesn't work. But I really like analog systems. I like the physicality of touching and moving and just having a body relationship with an instrument in a way is really special. I'm a terrible guitarist, I'm a terrible pianist, but I was over 6 weeks in Captiva in Florida on a residency and played the piano there a lot. And it was so beautiful in this building I was living and working in, to be able to just play a real piano, a beautifully expensive piano I could never afford that's £25,000 or something. Just to play that every day, there was something so joyful about it actually, and something so real, which sounds strange in a way, you know, but it's very, I mean, I feel fortunate to be of a generation which is, like many people, just in between. You know, we remember what things were before the internet and all that stuff was around, and then we've embraced it and we know what it can offer. And even today I read that CDs are making a comeback. You know, CDs appeared in many of our lives, suddenly like, wow, there's this thing called the compact disc, that's fantastic. And then suddenly people lost interest in them about 5 years ago or something, and sales really dropped. And I read today that they're all picking up again the same way that vinyl did. And it's really interesting how these kind of waves come through like that. It's the speed at which things develop like that is quite phenomenal. You know, the way the cycles move around, and it's very hard to keep up with all that stuff. But I still love technology, I can't deny it. I love all kinds of technology. I like possibilities. I like what it can offer, how it can connect, how it can bring people together, how you can share stuff. To me, it's absolutely liberating. The greatest thing about leaving London was actually being able to use the internet finally, because in London the internet was so atrocious. The fastest speed in most areas you can hear about is 5 megabytes per second, which meant we could not watch a YouTube video because all it would do is go. Left London, it's amazing. Moved to the East Midlands, it's phenomenal. It's like the future. That's what it was meant to be. Quite funny. Yes?
Do you have any favourite sounds from all the stuff you've recorded?
You know, it's funny, there's a sound I always like, and I heard it again the other day. I was walking down to the station where we live, and there's a flag on top of the church. And I love the sound. I've tried to record them over the years, never got a good recording of a flag moving in the wind, like sails by the water. I really love that sound. Another sound I really like, and we actually heard this again the other day, is, and it's something really intimate, which is funny, which is hot air balloons moving over. And they're really funny because they're over there and you hear nothing. And as soon as they reach you, you can almost hear the guys breathing in there. And then you hear the balloon go, shh, and it's right there, and it suddenly draws you in, and then it's gone again. And there's something beautifully intimate about it I really love. Very real world sounds, but there are so many sounds, you know, I've heard over the years that I really love. But it's funny, the sales one, I heard it again the other day that with the flag, and I thought, this is something so magical. I love it because you can never reach it. It's always far away. I can never really record it very well because it's at a distance always. And if I was right next to it, maybe it wouldn't have the same charm and the same magic. So maybe is there one more question there, and then we maybe should finish up and.
Still a question.
Yes, please.
Do you walk around with a sound recorder?
I've got a. Yeah, I still got a microphone for the iPhone, a really good quality microphone, so I can actually record things. You would testify that we were in Croatia and I was walking along the street and I saw the drain. I thought, wow, I bet that's a great sound in there. So I put the microphone in the drain. I'm a great embarrassment, you know. And yeah, you hear things and you think, wow, I should record that. The same way photographers do. They go, wow, I've got to capture that image, that light, that shape, the sun, whatever it may be. When you work with your ears, you can't help but keep using them. You can't switch. The thing is, you can do this, but you still can't really switch off sound. It's quite extraordinary. And there's still a magic about it that I love. There really is. It's something that I'm still very, very enthusiastic about. I love it. Okay, we're finished? Yes. Thank you. We should wrap up. Yeah.